The battle between church and state has long been contested in United States history. Early America clearly depended on religious morals and values to define their society. However, even one of the most religious settlements, the Puritans, insisted on distinct civil and religious institutions, denying political authority to church leaders. Early Americans even believed that tax support of one religion over another religion generally violated basic rights of morality. Religion is seemingly intertwined with the identity of the United States. Although Christianity was the driving religion in the early history of the U.S., religious movements and ideological shifts meant branches of Christianity were able to encompass most of the population's belief. This religious identity is tied with Americanism even to this day. It is true that more Americans are leaving structured religion, but there has also been an upheaval of traditional conservative Christianity in traditionally southern states. A surprisingly large percentage of citizens have already been involved in the current religious revival. Because of this, and the outspoken manner of the president and his cabinet, new debates of church and state has begun. Currently, more than 7 in 10 Americans oppose allowing churches and places of worship to endorse political candidates while retaining their tax-exempt status. However, this still means that 30% of Americans believe that church and state should be somewhat intertwined, and most of these Americans are located in similar locations and have similar beliefs, which makes their opinions weigh heavily on politicians. Donald Trump speaks to this 30% by talking about how he wants to change church and state.
Jefferson, who said, "The God who gave us life gave us liberty." Jefferson asked, "Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God?" Among those freedoms is the right to worship according to our own beliefs. That is why I will get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment and allow our representatives of faith to speak freely and without fear of retribution. I will do that, remember.
Trump's message is a representation of the current role that a revival of conservative Christianity is playing both socially and politically. By promising to revoke the Johnson Amendment, the line between church and state is becoming blurred. Also notable to state is that in the last 5 years, there has been an increase in church involvement in state affairs. Through history, there have been many religious revivals, which have affected policy changes and social movements in church versus state legislature. The 1700s were a defining time for traditional Christianity. At least 90 to 95% of the Founding Fathers were practicing Trinitarian Christians, accepted Protestantism. However, the Founding Fathers were heavily influenced by the Enlightenment movement, and in turn the First Great Awakening, in which traditional ideas about the morality and rigidness of humanity were challenged. The Enlightenment movement grew to challenge the notions of a holistic countrywide Christianity. John Locke, one of the scholars most notable for his role in the Enlightenment, stated in 1721, "The bounds of the church cannot in any manner be extended to civil affairs, because the church itself is a thing absolutely separate and distinct from the commonwealth and civil affairs. The boundaries of both sides are fixed and immovable." Locke's opinion must be taken as revolutionary as it influenced thinking leading up to the First Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening was the first major social revival taking place in the United States. Thousands of citizens joined churches, but denominations and communities were split by simple differences. This Great Awakening hardened the idea that support of any religious worship should be voluntary, not forced. In the midst of the Great Awakening, the United States was forming as a connected country, in which a federal government was much needed. By the time of the Constitution, the belief that government assistance to religion violated the religious liberty of its citizens was a common social belief. This social standard of thought led to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The amendment prohibited a religious establishment and protected free belief of religion, in which it states, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances." This amendment led to a phrase to represent the distinctly American pattern of church-state relations: separation of church and state. Although this seems very steadfast against the influence of the government in the United States, it is worth noting that at the time it was viewed that the Constitution only applied to the federal government, not to the states, and the states still had their official churches or could have one under the law at that time. As a matter of fact, the original Constitution of all 50 states mentions God. A conservative religious revival took place as a counterculture to new modernism in the boom years of the early 1900s. Because of this revival, more and more voices were being heard involving the disparity between Bible teachings and the growing academic climate of science. To put it bluntly, this religious revival cultivated itself to a battle between religion and science. Conservatism in the 1920s was showcased by the effort to ban school books on Bible disproving science. Science became an enemy to the Americans participating in the conservative movement. Science seemed to challenge the most basic ideas taught in the Bible. This conflict burst into a major public debate in a trial over Charles Darwin's idea of evolution, known as the Scopes trial. The Scopes trial was not really whether a teacher was innocent or guilty of teaching science. The real meaning was a struggle between the forces of modern ideas and those of traditional world conservatism. Many argued that since evolution contradicted the literal words of the creation story and taught that man was an animal, the teaching of evolution would weaken both religion and morality. A common fundamentalist belief during the trial is best stated by Williams Bryan. If civilization is to be saved from the wreckage threatened by intelligence, not consecrated by love, it must be saved by the moral code of the meek and lowly Nazarene. His teachings and his teachings alone can solve the problems that vex the heart and perplex the world. In the end, Scopes was found guilty of teaching Darwinism, although he was later acquitted. However, the trial was not about this one act, but instead a social movement for the importance of science. The trial was covered extensively by the press, meaning that many citizens became enraptured in the trial and exactly what teaching Darwinism means. To quote the newspaper The Nation, published at the time of the verdict, "The Battle of Tennessee may play as significant a part in American history as the Battle of Gettysburg. For what is at stake in the little town of Dayton is as important as any question of political structure, or even of physical freedom. It is a question of bondage of the human mind." This conservative revival trial did the exact opposite of what religious fundamentalists hoped for. Socially, the result of the trial is stated best by author Mark Edwards, saying that, in the wake of the Scopes trial, a humiliated fundamentalism retreated into the political and cultural background, a viewpoint evidenced in the movie Inherent in the Wind and many other social contexts. Socially, this is true. Fundamentalism quickly lost its voice on topics involving science and the result of God on textbooks in school. However, politically, the Scopes trial led to an influx of new conservative bills being passed as fundamentalists tried to regain their lost ground. By 1927, 13 states considered some form of anti-evolution law. 41 bills or resolutions were introduced into the state legislatures. Nearly all of these efforts were rejected, but Mississippi and Arkansas did pass anti-evolution laws, as well as in 1924 when the governor of North Carolina publicly opposed the teaching of evolution. After World War II, the post-war population was eager to renew its spiritual wells. The baby boom generation moved into the suburbs and filled the pews, establishing church and family as the twin pillars of security and respectability in the United States culture. The Protestant establishment, the main denominations of Baptists, Congregationalists, Lutherans, Methodists, and Presbyterians, dominated the religious scene of traditional moral society for the following 20 years post-World War II. A counterculture developed as the children of the baby boom generation began to look for independence from their suburban families. The civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, women's liberation, and many other movements for social change challenged the traditional church and its teachings. The church and many other big corporations were challenged by the young adults of the 1960s, leading to legal battles over religion. Those battles centered around interpretations of the First Amendment's religion clause. The almost anti-religious movement brought to light distinct ideological differences between the baby boomers and their children. This includes a shift to an expected absolute line between church and state. As more voices from the 1960s counterculture grew against the fundamentalist cry to give churches more power in the state, politicians reacted dutifully. President John F. Kennedy embodies the idea of the modern youth. In a speech directed to a group of Protestant ministers, Kennedy states,
"But what kind of America I believe in? I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him, or the people who might elect him."
Because of this religious revival, social and political thought turned to believe in a clear separation of church and state. Politically, there were many gains. By the mid-1960s, both Bible reading and prayer directed by the school had been banned from public schools. In terms of public health, the federal government has limited religious influence by ordering Jehovah's Witnesses to grant blood transfusions for their children, and convicting Christian Science parents for refusing medical care for their children. Religious movements in United States history have affected the government's policies and social thought between the separation of church and state. As conservatism fluctuates in the United States, so do policies and the general public's thoughts on the morals of the wall between religion and government.